Deputy President, there is no greater constitutional responsibility for any federal government or any federal MP, including those of us in this chamber today, than the defence and the security of our nation, and also the support for all of those who have served in uniform on behalf of all of us. In Australia, we therefore owe our sincere and immense gratitude and respect for the service made by all members of the ADF in all conflicts. Today I too rise to commend the Government and the Minister on the Veterans Affairs Legislation Omnibus Amendment Bill, which recognises the importance of the service of our current serving ADF members and also veterans. And I would acknowledge that this does have bipartisan support, and for that I thank those of the opposition. I'd also like to note and thank Senator Kitching for her comments on the Battle of Beersheba, and I had the pleasure and the honour of attending those ceremonies and also strategic dialogues after that ceremony, and I will address that particular incident, episodes, celebrations later on in this place. But while some might say that these amendments are relatively modest and minor, it certainly does not mean that the benefit and outcome of these amendments are modest nor minor. But they are part of a much longer-term journey to reform how we support our veterans. This Omnibus Bill does provide amendments that are absolutely necessary to assist and afford our veterans with dignity, respect, recognition and the support they so rightly deserve. As Australians, we must all recognise the service of our veterans, but also the challenges they and their families and friends endure and suffer as a consequence of their service. Every veteran who has served our nation has their own personal story. Some are told and are remembered through families, others are captured in history and in documentation. But what is not always remembered is that their stories and their experience are also the shared experience of the families who have, in effect, served alongside them. And Australians are rightly proud of the service of our ADF members. And I, like other members of this chamber and in the other place, have served in the Australian Defence Force. And I remain just as proud of that service and the service of all others in uniform as I was the day that I enlisted. However, what I would like to do now is to share with you the story of one particular person, a family member, and record his story in this place, because unlike many others with their family members don't have access to their family stories, to those of who served in the past, but I do. And I would like to share with you the story of my own grandfather, Alfred George Reynolds. My grandfather was a brave and courageous man who, like many other of his generation in World War I, selflessly volunteered and signed up to serve their country so that today we could have the freedoms and opportunities that we do to live in a society of free speech and other democratic freedoms. On the 1st of November 1914, Alfred George Reynolds was one of the young soldiers who departed Albany in the first convoy. He was a 3rd Field Ambulance medic who, against all of the odds, served not only throughout Gallipoli, but all throughout the Western Front, Fromelles, Somme, Pozières, Ypres and Amiens. One can't even imagine the horror, year after year, that he and his mates went through. And unlike so many of his friends over those 4 years, he did return, and he did return alive. While he may have returned home in reasonably good health, mentally he had changed. He was terribly scarred. My grandfather, throughout his life, rarely talked about his experiences, and he neither valued nor kept reminders of the war. And my dad, as a young boy, was totally bewildered often by my grandfather's behaviour and just could not understand his rages, his moods, his depression, because he could not possibly understand what my grandfather had been through on the Western Front and at Gallipoli. So like many others after the war, he didn't talk about it. He just got on with life as best he could. He raised his 6 children, and he continued to do many things in his life, including, I must say, becoming a Labor MP in the WA State Parliament. In Western Australia, he went on, as I said, to do many things. He had been a wool classer. He was a wheat and sheep farmer in Muckenbooden in the West Australian sheep belt. He was an accountant in Albany, and, as I said, even as a Labor politician. Nonetheless, throughout his life, my grandfather maintained a selfless sense of sacrifice and service to his country. His story is like so many of those shared now in the Albany Anzac Centre. But like many others, the story that is untold are each of the stories of each of these veterans and the impact that their service in our name has had on the rest of their lives and the lives of their families. None of us can truly understand nor appreciate what our returned servicemen and servicewomen experience on operations and in war. That is a right that is reserved solely for those others who have served in war and in operations. But like my grandfather did, and like those veterans subsequently, many do return changed. They find it difficult to struggle to reintegrate back into society and to reintegrate into their families. And tragically, between 2001 and 2005, there were 325 suicides amongst people who had served in the ADF since 2001. And alarmingly, this represents a figure now of 23 veteran suicides a year, which is, I know, is incredibly sad and impacts on all in this chamber. So we as a government, working with those on all sides of this chamber, must do what we can do and always support our servicemen and women and their families, regardless of whether they are veterans or currently serving, to ensure that we provide them at all stages of their career with the appropriate levels of individualised support. Currently, the Department of Veterans Affairs supports about 291,000 Australians, and just over half this figure are veterans or current serving members of the ADF. The department does provide more than $11 billion annually, and around $6.2 billion is spent on income support and compensation, and around $5 billion is provided to veterans for healthcare and other rehabilitation services. I know this government does understand and recognises the immense gratitude we all have for our current serving ADF members and for our veterans, and they have provided an additional $350 million for veterans in this year's budget, an additional $58.6 million in funding for much-needed and very welcome mental health initiatives. In addition to this government has provided $38 million in the 16-17 budget to cover PTSD, anxiety, depression, alcohol and substance abuse and other mental illnesses which have resulted from service. This bill and the additional funding will mean that anyone who has served in full-time in the ADF can access free treatment for any mental health condition. And that is such an important development, and again it is wonderful to see that it has bipartisan support. But I think not only is this a huge leap forward in the provision of mental health support and the destigmatisation and the continual ongoing destigmatisation of this issue, is that not only can anybody who has served full-time in the ADF access this free treatment, but it is fully funded but also uncapped. Now, as I have said, we can't comprehend the circumstances that our men and women face on operations, and never can we truly financially compensate them for what they and their families have given and sacrificed for our nation. But what we can do is continue to strive to continuing to provide better and more targeted services and support. So, in addition, $166.6 million has also been dedicated to implement the first stage of the veteran-centric reform program, which will ensure, one would hope, that the Department's transformational journey continues to provide the absolute best possible and tailored services to support our veterans. Madam Acting Deputy President, we all are indebted to our current ADF members and returned service men and women for their sacrifice and their dedication. So this is why, again, I think the bill, while perhaps modest in size, is certainly not modest in impact. And I'd just like to go through some of the reforms that are introduced in this legislation. So first of all, the schedules include, so Schedule 1 amends the Veterans Entitlement Act to modernise and improve the operation by aligning provisions with similar provisions to that of the AAT Act. Again, sounds a bit bureaucratic, but for those who are navigating the system themselves, a very important change. Schedule 2 modernises and streamlines the Veterans Entitlement Act to improve the Specialist Medical Review Council by simplifying the appointment processes for counsellors, also progressing whole-of-government requirements for digital transformation. It removes red tape in commencing reviews and provides for reimbursement of certain travel expenses. And again, for all of those of us, and I'm sure everybody in this chamber does engage regularly with veterans, the simplification of a bewilderingly and unnecessarily complex process is another very welcome step forward. Schedule 3 of the bill ensures that arrangements with foreign governments can be made to ensure that benefits and payments, again, can be made to our veterans. Again, another relatively minor but very important change for veterans. Schedule 4 strengthens a foundation for providing rehabilitation assistance and support to both current ADF members and to veterans. Schedule 5 allows for the facilitation of information sharing to assist with the efficiency of compensation claims. Again, a procedural motion, but for those of you who know veterans who struggle with this system and this process, another welcome streamlining of the process. Schedule 5 also ensures that those veterans who are entitled for discounted pharmaceuticals are afforded with access to these services, again giving them greater access to pharmaceuticals than they currently do. Again, an overwhelmingly good thing. Schedule 6 inserts minor procedural amendments to allow for the delegation of ministerial powers and functions. Again, an administrative process, but again one designed to speed up the process and make it easier for veterans. In Schedules 7 and 8, these will implement minor technical amendments and remove several parts that are no longer relevant within the respective acts. So these schedules will provide extra clarity and a little more certainty for veterans. And again, while technical in nature, it is all about making the Act easier to read, getting rid of things that should no longer be in there, and provide veterans and their families and their advocates with a greater making it easier for them to access services and the support they are entitled to receive. I'd just like to also note that the Senate Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Committee, which was until recently chaired by my great friend and colleague from Western Australia, now retired Senator Chris Back, who I've got to acknowledge had a great passion for and interest in veteran support and veteran entitlements. And he was, and I'm sure will remain, a great advocate for veterans and acknowledgement of their service, and for particularly for getting rid of really dumb red tape that just made their lives even more challenging. So Senator Back inquired into this Omnibus bill, and the committee recommended that the Senate pass this bill. And I'd just like to share with you some of the things that Senator Back, as chair, and the committee observed in relation to this bill. So the committee found that, unsurprisingly, witnesses were supportive of the bill's intent to improve the services and supported this extra support to veterans. So this is how the report concluded. While the committee acknowledges submitters' concerns regarding some of the schedules of the bill, it has been reassured by the evidence received from principal members of the Veterans Review Board and from officers of the Commonwealth Superannuation Corporation and the Department of Veterans Affairs in response to those concerns. The committee had indicated in its report that many of the concerns that were raised by witnesses had been sufficiently and most adequately addressed and explained such that any misunderstanding of the applications of sections introduced in this bill were nullified. Further to this, those opposite, in their additional comments, have also stated that the majority of concerns in relation to this bill had been addressed. Madam Acting Deputy President, this bill is a bill that needs to be passed in the Senate. It reflects and is indicative and respectful of our men and women whose selfless sacrifice, determination and service allows us to have the freedoms that we enjoy here today. And as I've said, none of us can truly understand what our returned servicemen and women have experienced in war, and I know through my own personal family experience we can never truly understand the impact that it has on their immediate and extended family and friends. So therefore it is incumbent on all of us in this place, as all of us acknowledge here, that we've got to keep meeting the ongoing challenge to update the legislation to make sure that our veterans of all ages, all generations and all conflicts are provided with all the possible support that we can provide them. I commend the Government and the Minister on this Omnibus bill and support its passage, and I also thank those opposite for their engagement and their support on this important bill. Thank you.